Take a look at this mosaic. We see an 11th century Byzantine empress draped in jewels, wearing a heavy crown, projecting divine authority. But the reality of her existence begins with a profound disappointment. When a noble father in Constantinople is told his newborn child is a girl, he may refuse to speak for the rest of the day. A daughter is a liability, waiting to be traded. By the time she turns 15, a palace official arrives at the door with a rolled proclamation. The emperor is looking for a wife. This triggers an empire-wide bride show, a mandatory casting call where noble families present their daughters for imperial consideration. The elimination process is clinical. The emperor's mother moves down a line of the final few dozen girls. With practiced efficiency, she lifts the girl's chin, checks her teeth, and runs her hands through her hair against the window light, dismissing candidates for a birthmark on the neck or a slight asymmetry in the shoulders. The survivors are led into a side chamber filled with bronze calipers, measuring cords, and ivory probes. Palace maids meticulously measure each girl's arm span, hip width, and chest circumference. One is eliminated for a crooked finger, another because her hip measurements fall outside the acceptable administrative range. The final check happens in a curtained alcove. A lady-in-waiting pins the girl firmly to a bed, while a midwife reaches under her clothes to verify her purity. The young woman stares at the ceiling and bites her lip until she tastes copper, forcing herself to stay completely silent. When it ends, a physician simply calls out, "Send in the next one." The surviving girls return to the main hall, keeping their faces entirely empty. The emperor walks the line holding a golden apple. He stops to offer a small provocation, watching her eyes to see what lies behind them. She gives the correctly trained answer, and he hands her the apple. This brutal gauntlet grants no actual power. The golden apple simply transfers her ownership. She is now the state property of the Byzantine Empire. Her wedding night features an audience of 40 men. Scribes take notes while the empire's patriarch circles the bed with incense. In the corner, she notices a specific general watching with a hungry expression. When she bleeds, the men shout congratulations, and the emperor stands to thank them. Despite her title, the new empress is confined to the gyneconitis, the women's quarters far removed from the main palace. Eunuchs act as her only bridge to the outside world, and her ladies-in-waiting report her every move. It is a very clean prison cell. She spends her isolation studying the women who held her title before her. Empresses who reached for influence ended up in convents with shaved heads, or had their noses amputated as administrative procedure. Even the one who became a saint had to blind her own son to rule. To die a natural death, she chooses to become invisible. She decides to be the least interesting empress Constantinople has ever seen, smiling and deferring at the right moments to give the court absolutely nothing to write about. At 20 years old, she wakes up with a groggy heaviness and vomits into a basin. To determine the child's gender, palace staff perform a traditional test. They pour her urine over seeds of barley and wheat, monitoring the germination process like military intelligence. The barley sprouts first. Delivering a male heir secures the imperial line, but it shifts the political weight of the empire. The baby in her arms is a target. His existence draws the attention of every man waiting for the throne, including the emperor's own brother. A few years later, a messenger arrives from the northern front. The emperor has fallen in battle. His brother has spent years building a faction, moving treasury assets and gathering loyalists. He is ready to seize the throne. She has exactly 2 hours before word of the emperor's death spreads. She dismisses the room, stands still for 4 minutes, and then moves. She drafts a military order and stamps it by forging the emperor's personal wax seal. The message recalls the loyal general from the Eastern Front to surround the capital. She knows the general's loyalty has an expiration date, but she remembers the hungry way he watched her during her wedding festival years ago. She leverages that desire, trading her body to secure his absolute military backing. With the military en route, she addresses the court. She presents another document, stamped with the imperial seal, declaring herself Empress Regent. By the time her brother-in-law attempts to move 3 days later, he finds the walls of Constantinople sealed and the court aligned behind her. By shedding her invisibility and weaponizing the patriarchal system that oppressed her, she hijacks the empire. The silent figurehead begins managing military campaigns, foreign diplomacy, and treasury reforms. Look at this gold coin bearing her likeness. It represents her daily exercise of authority, keeping the state functional while the men around her wait for her to fail. Ruling requires a constant balancing act between the aristocracy, merchant class, and the military. The general expects a son, a rival claim. Becoming pregnant twice, she relies on her midwife to handle it quietly, refusing to allow a rival bloodline. Meanwhile, her son is growing up. He trains in the yard until his hands bleed. On his 14th birthday, he asks when he will rule. She tells him the time isn't right. He asks again, year after year, his questions gaining a sharper, more exhausted edge. The daily labor of empire is the exhausting maintenance of holding off the men waiting for her to show weakness. She governs while her son watches with an expression she can no longer identify. She turns 40. Her son is now 19. One evening, he enters her chambers unannounced. There is no knock and no formality. He sits across from her, radiating exhaustion, and demands the throne one last time. When she tries to explain the lingering threats of the general and his uncle, he stands. He tells her the guards are now loyal to their king. He repeats his uncle's accusations, that she conspired with the general, let his father die, and planned to hoard power forever. He pulls out a blade and gouges out her eyes. The last thing she sees is his face. It isn't filled with rage, but a cold, satisfied smile. It is the look of a man who has finally solved a problem and is already moving to the next one. Her wounds are treated while her chambers are locked. Within a week, she sits in the dark and listens to the fanfare outside. The sun is crowned, and the city of Constantinople moves on without her. She spent 19 years outmaneuvering a general and a brother-in-law, only to be undone by the one person she never considered a threat. She was destroyed by the very male heir the system forced her to create.